Hello my friends, welcome back to another video. Today we are actually diving back into the election series, and we are going to be doing both 1952 and 1956 today. Now these elections were both between two heavyweights, one on each side, and then of course the smaller third-party candidates, which we'll get to too. But for this election, in my subscriber poll, which is how everyone voted on this, the Republican candidate is going to be the famous General Eisenhower, and then the Democratic candidate is going to be Adlai Stevenson II. And let's look at how the election went historically. Also, you may notice that we have a new custom map and all that. Let me know if you like that more than the previous one, and I'll take that into consideration. I like this quite a bit, but again, you can let me know. Let's look at the real-life elections. Now, for the 1952 election in real life, we're looking at 442 electoral votes for Eisenhower, only 89 for Adlai Stevenson. Not good at all, and he's more than 10 points above Adlai Stevenson in popular vote share right here, which is pretty crazy. But we will see what happens. Of course, a lot of the times you guys seem to want to do things that are different just for the sake of being different, or maybe, there's a whole bunch of different reasons for how you guys voted. But let's look into it here. So if you're new to this, I'm trying out a new thing right now, and that is first going over safe states, then likely states, and then getting a little more detailed with the closer states. And that's how we do it. Before, we used to go region by region until we were all done. But we're trying this out again for the second video in a row, so we will see how it goes. But let's start off with safe states. Now here are the safe states for the real election, and the safe states for the poll election are the exact same, actually. And actually, so are all of the likely states. This election is interestingly very similar. This is the poll election, the one that you guys had, although there are some differences in South Carolina, Kentucky, and Louisiana. Everything else is the exact same, which is pretty interesting, but that's not because the percentages are just like how it is here with 55.2 and 44.3. You might think, okay, it must be very similar then. That's not exactly true. But let's get into the states that are left over here. Kentucky was a tilt Democratic state, so barely won by Adlai Stevenson, and Louisiana was a likely Democratic state, and South Carolina is a lean Democratic state. These are all different here. So anything could really happen here, but it's not going to change the result. Eisenhower has won, but let's get into this real quick. First of all, we got Kentucky. In the real election, you can see it was a Democrat tilt state, very, very close, and it is actually clinched by Eisenhower in this timeline, and not only just as a tilt state, but as a lean Republican state, so that is interesting. Even more interesting than that, I would say, is Tennessee actually staying the same. You see Kentucky as a tilt state, and Tennessee is a tilt state, but then Kentucky moves all the way to the other side and as a lean state, but Tennessee stays a tilt state. I'll get into that in just a second. But we have two more states left, and that is South Carolina and Louisiana. I will tell you right now, they do not switch to the Republicans. So everything else is the same electoral vote-wise except for Kentucky, but they did change their margins. I will show you how that happened. In South Carolina, it goes from, as you can see here, a lean Democratic state to a tilt Democratic state. Almost got won by Eisenhower. And then for Louisiana, it went from a likely Democrat state right there to a lean Democrat state right there. So those are the final results. So as you can see, at the end of everything, we end up with 452 electoral votes for Eisenhower and only 79 for Adlai Stevenson. So only a difference of 10, of course, that 10 coming from Kentucky. Everything else is the same. But like I said earlier, the popular vote is not the same. You can see Eisenhower only has 50%. Over here he has 55%, so he lost 5%, but won the election by more, which is always very interesting. Of course, you can see what probably caused that is a lot of Democrat support just feigning away into progressive support. It's interesting to see the progressives still so high. Of course, that makes sense. They won last election, so you guys obviously wanted to vote progressive in some elections, although I guess 1948 much more than others. They lost about 25%. I think in the last election they had like 38% of the vote, so that is a huge loss for them. But that is why we see Eisenhower doing better, even though he was doing worse. Very interesting, a very quick election, but I promise you, I could wager a guess that 1956 right here is going to be more interesting than 1952, and there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, it's kind of just a gut feeling. You guys like to cut down candidates in the second term. You could see that in our FDR video. You guys really wanted to attack him as he got later into his electoral, political career, which is interesting. And then also, of course, you have the topic of it being, wanting to fight history. And also, another thing that makes this more interesting is that I do not have a progressive candidate on the ballot for this poll. I actually had a Dixiecrat, that's this orange color. I had a Dixiecrat on ballot, so that means that all the people who voted progressive could not vote progressive this time. So I'd wager a guess that they voted for a Democrat instead. So we could be looking at a much closer election. But anyway, let's get into it. Now we can actually go about this in a normal style. But first of all, let me show you the real 1956 election right here. As you can see, 457 electoral votes and 73 votes for the Democrat, and then 1 for the Southern Democrat. Now you can see, compared to 1952, there is definitely a little bit of a reshuffling here. It's interesting to see a loss of support in the West. You can see states shift from safe to likely. That is very interesting. But then also other states shift from likely to safe. Like look at New England. Look over here and then look over here. Look at that solidification. So interesting. And also you have the flipping of Missouri. That is a definite point of interest there. But anyway, scan into your brain the safe states for this election for Democrats and for the Republicans. Now let's go over the safe states for the voter election. Now for the Republican candidate, that is again Eisenhower, but again this is a matchup between Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson, with also T. Coleman Andrews as a Dixiecrat candidate. The safe states starting with Eisenhower are Kansas, Nebraska, Utah, New Jersey, Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire. And that is it for safe states. So again, compare that to the real one. Look at all the safe states here. Look how little are here. We'll see if that's worrying for him in a moment. Let's move on to the Democrats. Now, no surprise for the Democrats, safe states include Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. The racism friendship group over here makes sense. Arkansas as well is added to the list. And also South Carolina and North Carolina, which is definitely an improvement over last election's performance. But let's compare that now to the real election. You can see not too many changes here, but of course the solidification of Arkansas and then a more major solidification of North Carolina from a lean state to a solid state. This doesn't mean much though. A lot of things can change. Let's move on to the likely states. Now for Republicans, likely states include Arizona, Colorado, Wyoming, North Dakota. In the Rust Belt we have Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, the state of Massachusetts, the state of Connecticut, and then very critically the state of New York is actually taken by the Republicans. A very big blow, a very serious state to take. Also, I guess you could say the same for these states. There's a lot of electoral votes there. Let's move on to the Democrats. Likely states for the Democrats include the state of Washington, the state of Idaho, the state of Minnesota, the state of Missouri, I guess that makes sense compared to the actual election, the state of Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, and that is it for likely states. You can see a lot more likely states, a lot more states already being flipped compared to the actual election. You can see these were all Republican states, no longer. These were all Republican states, no longer. So very interesting to see. Does it mean the end of the world though? No. Let's look at how the electoral tallies are looking so far. Alrighty, so here we go. We are back. I also apologize. I forgot to mention Maryland as a likely Republican state, so we add that to the tally, and we end up with already 206 electoral votes for the Republicans and 127, a massive trail by the Democrats. Although you could say this is awesome because he's already gotten a lot more electoral votes than he has in our timeline, that is for sure. Now, in this point of time in history, you only need 266 to win, which means that the Republicans only need 60 more. A lot of these states were won by them in real life, so it should still be an easy coast, but we will kind of see what trend emerges as we start looking at the lean states. Let's get into it. Now for lean states, let's start in the West. The state of Oregon is going to be a lean Democrat state, and the same is true for California. In Nevada, it is a lean Republican state. They were able to hold on to Nevada. In New Mexico, the Democrats versus the Republicans, the Republicans end up on top. South Dakota is another lean state, and it comes up with plus 2 points for the Republicans. With a margin of 3 points, the Republicans also win the state of Iowa, and with a margin of 2 points, they also win Wisconsin. The state of Virginia is a more interesting race, as it being in the South means there's a lot of Dixiecrat activity. Dixiecrats end up with a nice boost to selection. It does nothing to change the result of this in any significant way, and it still ends up being a win for the Republicans. They get to take Virginia, although at a smaller margin because of the Dixiecrats. That is their only impact here. It went from probably a 3 to 4 point state to only a 2-point state. That's the difference. Now, the brother of Wisconsin, Michigan, ends up being a lean state as well, and with only a 2-point margin, the Democrats are actually able to take Michigan. A very nice grab for them, especially considering all of the wins for Republicans that have just happened. In Florida, the Dixiecrats fight again, but Democrats are able to take the advantage and get a small, lean win in Florida. The Dixiecrats doing very well in Texas does mess up the vote a little bit, but it does end up being a +3 victory for the Democrats. A very nice victory. The lack of Dixiecrats in Oklahoma actually makes it a +4 victory for Democrats as well. Speaking of +4s, the state of Delaware is also a +4 state for the Democrats. They're able to win Delaware. And a similar story takes place in Rhode Island with a +3 to 4 point margin for the Republicans. They're able to take Rhode Island. Where are we now, electoral vote-wise? Now here we are with only 3 states left on the map. This is probably one of the closer elections that we've had on the channel so far. The Republicans are 11 points from victory, 11 votes, electoral votes away from victory. The Democrats are still trailing. They have 36 electoral votes that they need to win the election. Now, with it coming down to such a small amount of states, of course, every single state matters. For the Republicans, they need to either lose Pennsylvania and take both Montana and Louisiana, or they just need to take Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is most vital for the Republicans. For the Democrats, Pennsylvania also happens to be the most vital state. Even if they won these two, they would still lose the election very narrowly. Now, there's not much else to do except actually go through these final 3 states. I know the suspension's probably killing you. Hello, if you skipped all the way to the end. Nice to see you. It comes down to 3 states. Let's start off with the one with the least amount of electoral votes, as that has the least amount of impact. The state of Montana. Let's break this down. In real life, the Dems got 42.87% of the vote, and the Republicans got 57.13% of the vote, which is a pretty big margin. This does mean, however, that the Republicans did 0.27% worse than they did overall, popular vote-wise. And Democrats outperformed their popular vote margin for the whole country by only 0.87. Will that be enough? I'm not quite sure. But either way, everything's going to be very, very close now. The Dixiecrats did not really have a presence here, although of course they still get points since people voted for them overall in the popular vote. Now, after everything, the Dixiecrats end up with 4% of the vote. The Democrats end up with 48.67% of the vote. And the Republicans end up with 48.33% of the vote, meaning that this is a win for the Democrats. Only 4 electoral votes, but oh well, better than nothing. And this is only won by 0.34%. Not even half of 1 percentage point. Very, very close. Might be one of the closest elections we've had so far in a state. I'll have to check. But we are not done. We have 2 more states. Now the Republicans, of course, they still need Pennsylvania. And now that's the only way that they're getting the White House. If they were to get Louisiana, they would only be 1 electoral vote short, although they would still be short. And it would be one of the closest elections in American history. So let's move on to Louisiana then. Let's see what happens here. Now, in real life, the Democrats ended up with 40% of the vote, and the Republicans ended up with 53% of the vote. That means that the Democrats actually did not do as well here compared to the national vote. They did 2 percentage points worse here, and the Republicans also did 4% worse here. And you might be wondering why that is. It's because the Dixiecrats did very well in Louisiana, as you might expect. They got 7% of the vote, which is a pretty big deal. That means they end up with 11% of the vote after everything, and the Republicans end up with 45% of the vote, and Democrats end up with 46% of the vote. This is another Democrat win. Now, this is a perfect result for someone like me. I love to see this kind of stuff. This is definitely exciting. We are literally going to decide the fate of this country based on good old Pennsylvania, which also decided the fate of the country in 2024, the last election we had, so that's neat. Probably will be the same story in 2028. How topical. But here Pennsylvania's back again to decide everything for everyone else. Let's get into it. In real life, the Democrats got 43% of the vote and the Republicans got 56% of the vote, with not much Dixiecrat activity or third party activity, so that doesn't really matter. So after everything, here we go. Dixiecrats end up with 4% of the vote. The Republicans end up with 48% of the vote. And Democrats end up with 49% of the vote. That means that Adlai Stevenson wins this election against Eisenhower in a major upset, super close. Let's get into this really quick before I leave you guys for today's video. We end up with 255 electoral votes for Eisenhower, and we end up with 276 for Adlai Stevenson. A very close race. We end up with 0 for the Dixiecrats, but they did get 3.5% of the vote. Who would vote for them? I don't know, but you guys decided to. Another interesting thing, you can see that actually Eisenhower won the popular vote by almost 2 points, but he still lost the election. So interesting. That is because the Dixiecrats did very well, and also the fact that there was no progressive candidate on the ballot. That did help as well, inadvertently, in Adlai Stevenson's eventual win. This is very cool. Let's compare this to the actual election, and there really isn't much to compare because they're just so different. But you can see where the Republicans were able to hold out the most in some of their old prime territory in New England and the Rocky Mountain area. There are still a lot of holdouts there, but it just was not enough. So here is our viewers' 1952 election versus 1956. Very cool. Thank you so much for watching this video. All of this information is going to be put into my Discord server, where I have very in-depth analysis of everything, as you can see right here. I write down even the vote numbers, which will be very interesting for this election as well. For everything, I also have extra maps and stuff available as a resource if you guys are interested in seeing, up close and personal how your choices change the elections of the United States. And there's also a lot of other stuff, a lot of other reasons to join the server, but I won't self-shill on that too much. Thank you so much for my members for watching this video and contributing to my channel. Thank you so much for the normal viewer who reached the end of this video. This is probably quite a long one, so I appreciate your support. It means a lot. And I hope I can see you for the next one, which will be quite interesting. It will be JFK versus Nixon, a very famous race and a very famously close race. Maybe even stolen is what some people say. The election was stolen. And there is actually some valid evidence behind that, but that's neither here or there. That is about it for this video. You guys have a good rest of your day or night. See ya.